I think the most insane take about The Acolyte was this.
Journalism looking at you. Did you forget it's your job to provide the truth?
Having a go at journalists when they've been sacrificing their credibility on the altar of your show. Well, I never saw that coming.
Seem you gave up on your efforts, your money, and views.
If there was anybody left that respected the corporate media, reading articles like this would have been more than enough to dissuade them otherwise. The Acolyte's 15% audience score is embarrassing for the audience. And this same attitude has been seen across multiple IPs. Another one at the moment where it's happening is Doctor Who. Doctor Who Season 14 was the jumpstart the sci-fi series has needed for years. Where you're giving it a jumpstart to off a cliff. And The Guardian made it worse. Radiant charms, scene-stealing tears, and steamy kisses. Cutie Gatwa is the new golden age of Doctor Who. He's in the shower, it's golden everywhere. Or as I thought correctly summarised it on Twitter, me when I'm on crack. In fact, The Acolyte is so farcical that when you read articles supporting it, they come across as parody in themselves. Even Grok AI ended up with accidental deadpan comedy gold. Star Wars fans await The Acolyte premiere with bated breath. The online community is buzzing with excitement about the upcoming episode. Discussions are filled with excitement, speculation, and predictions. And then literally, the first post underneath, Nerdrotic. Only 4 more episodes to go, folks. Yeah, there's a man that's waiting this episode with bated breath. Just not for the reasons Grok thinks he is. This might even potentially have lightsaber battles and significant plot developments. That'd be a first for the pissing series, wouldn't it? 4 episodes in, we've had none of that yet. Oh no, how did that get in there, right? I must have misclicked.
I suppose if I'm honest, I'm a little depressed.
So am I, mate. We're from the UK, it's normal.
My brilliant wife, Georgia, she educates me about empathy and understanding.
Don't worry, Tennant, you're being educated by a woman. It all makes sense now.
She's the real engine behind anything we do. Here we go again.
But you want to know the insane thing about Amandla's, I was going to say song, but I don't think I can call it that, is it does seem to have worked. Since that point, there have been loads of articles that are coming out defending The Acolyte from various different perspectives. Well, I say various different perspectives. They're all from an insane asylum. They've got that in common. About different topics might be a better way of putting it. For instance, we've got the oldie but the goodie. The Jedi have been the bad guys in Star Wars for a long time. Ironically, she seems to have a censored nose. I don't know whether you can see that. Her picture has so few pixels, it looks like somebody's trying to hide the identity of her nose. It's like a Japanese adult movie. We've got Paul Tassi, an oldie but a goodie. I mean Paul, not the date it was made. In 3 weeks, The Acolyte has more audience reviews than 3 seasons of The Mandalorian. Don't look me in the eye and tell me it's not being review bombed to hell and back. Why? Because it's got more audience reviews? Paul, I thought you were arguing that it was popular. I thought loads of people were going and watching this on Disney+. Of course it's got more reviews. It's so successful.
Interviews and shows where the spotlight goes, pretending life is tough when I'm in fancy clothes. Cry wolf, cry wolf.
I'm not even sure what your point is. As a review takes effort to do, and so if something is really bad, people will be more driven to go out and review it than something that is basically meh. The biggest problem most people have with The Mandalorian is the difficulty staying awake while watching it. It's very difficult to review a show when you've passed out, I tell you. But The Acolyte is so bad, they're like, somebody needs to be told about this. We also had The Acolyte episode 4 controversy is too absurd to be believed. This week's seemingly uncontroversial episode found controversy all the same, because a guy that shouldn't exist in the show was in it, and it broke canon. I can't believe they're annoyed that they're breaking canon. Look, I didn't think it was that big a deal either, but I'm not into Star Wars. It's not difficult to understand why people who are into Star Wars care about it. It might be difficult for you to put yourself into somebody else's position, so maybe do a thought experiment and think how you'd feel if something you cared about was being destroyed. Imagine Amber Heard came in and crapped on your pillow or something. How would you feel then? Unless you're into that, in which case, think of something else.
Another case of a man taking credit for a woman's work.
And I thought the journos were getting really desperate when they came out with this. If you think The Acolyte's cliffhanger was bad, this one was worse. And my first thought was, oh, have you seen episode 5? Is there a cliffhanger at the end of episode 5 which is worse than the one at 4, or 3, or 2, or the rest of them? It turns out, no. They're comparing The Acolyte to an entirely different show. Hey, if you thought The Acolyte was bad, have you seen season 6 of Walking Dead? How is that relevant? No, I'm not someone that thinks saying whataboutism is a rebuttal. There are lots of times when saying, well, what about this, is simply a good way to try and make somebody see something from a different point of view. It's a legitimate part of conversation. It does have to be related though, doesn't it? That's kind of the key point. You can't go, I think The Acolyte is bad, and someone comes along and goes, well, what about Batman? Have you seen Ezra Miller?
The Mad Goose Wizard.
He was crap too. There are many ways they could have legitimately made this point. This isn't one of them. And largely because to stay relevant, they would have had to have made it also about the Acolyte. Look, if you think the problems in episode 4 is bad, this one in episode 3 was way worse. But of course, they can't do that because unlike what Amandla said,
Truth, forget it's your job to provide the truth. Give up all your efforts, your money and views.
they're desperately trying to defend the show and shift blame onto literally anything else. This seems to be the argument of, entertainment was always trash. At least it's slightly improved now. This time they didn't crap on your face, they just did it in your shoes. I'm sorry, am I supposed to be pleased about that? And I think that journalists have really reached the bottom of the barrel for excuses when they pull out Old Faithful.
Oh, well, it's just Star Wars fatigue. That's why nobody likes it anymore.
All the Star Wars shows that have come out have been excellent, but the fans of Star Wars are just sitting there and go, God, I know that was amazing, but quite frankly, I don't like good content anymore. Please, can you make something trash for me? That way, I won't be fatigued of it anymore. What I really like is a variety in the quality of my entertainment. Sometimes I like to be entertained, and other times I like to be so bored, I fall into a coma.
I take responsibility.
But like any sci-fi or fantasy universe, there's always a gradient of evil, and oftentimes the heroes will fight a load of lesser enemies before eventually facing off against the big bad. And that is what we've got in journalism. And you may think this is an article that would actually go against the cast of The Acolyte. No. Despite The Acolyte being a show all about spot the testosterone, with 4 episodes in, I've still yet to find any. Apparently, the problem with The Acolyte is basically, it doesn't go far enough. That's right, despite the fact that The Acolyte is the peak symbol of everything their ideology stands for, it's still not enough. If only we'd virtued harder, if only we'd put more incompetent people into positions that they don't deserve and couldn't get to on their own.
The desperation of oppressors is rising, and now they holding on to any old thing they can use.
If only we'd uplifted the paranoid lunatics who think they're oppressed despite having the entire system built specifically for them.
If you rely upon misinformation, then that tells me you're afraid of the truth.
Well, maybe if we just went a little bit further, maybe they'd be equal. Even and all of Disney is structured to give you an advantage.
How would they say it?
No way we're hiring a white helmet.
Those blokes just keep winning. I tell you, we're getting to a point where some very awkward questions are going to be asked. Like, if we are equal, how come you've never successfully oppressed half the population? Because the blokes can do it, even when they're specifically trying not to. Now that's talent. But before we go into the rantings of a madman on a caffeine binge, it showcases the budget for The Acolyte. And as we know, reported budget for the entire series are 180 million. But it turns out that 48.5 million was done simply on pre-production, before they'd even filmed anything. When you're spending 180 million, with 50 million of it just being wasted before the cameras roll, it makes the Willow TV series seem like a bargain, doesn't it?
A mother gives birth. Her body makes milk for the child.
Stop, please stop.
It's nourishment. It's the part of himself that he gives to us.
It's worm secretion. It'll taste really nice. Don't lick your lips, love. What was that?
Dad, I'm not you.
All right, you're not. You're better.
And I could have finally understood why every time he chose you instead of me.
It's not about you! Oh, it's so annoying! Not only was it a better show,
Taken me a long time to figure out who I am.
Could you stop heavy breathing, please? It's really distracting.
it was cheaper. There's gotta be an argument for season 2, hasn't it? Disney, you made a mistake, but there's still time to fix it. Do yourself a favor. Save $30 million by making Willow season 2. That's girl math for you.
Go ahead, kid. Fetch me some brine possum bladder. Sprinkle it on my bum and make my gentle winds smell like cinnamon.
But they get into the apparently unequal pay that happens on Star Wars, which is basically I'm too thick to abstract and so can't understand numbers. But despite the point being made due to incompetence, it still does go against Amandla's narrative.
Journalists are looking at you. Did you forget it's your job to provide the truth?
Because this is very much an article in support of Amandla's narrative, in the fact that the figures are entirely misleading, yet are still designed to push one story, that people like Amandla deserve more money, which I'm sure she wouldn't complain about.
Give up all your efforts, your money and views.
They're doing their best to appease you, Amandla. How much more do they have to do? How much more do they have to flay themselves on the back before you'll accept them.
The Acolyte isn't a force for equality, despite famously featuring a female-centric cast.
Very woman-centered world. Star Wars is
outside of the confines of heteronormativity, misogyny, and racism.
It's thug life.
Some may say that if you're specially privileging an entire group of people and they're still not equal, maybe that should tell you something. But in early April last year, streaming service was in full swing. Just 30% of the nearly 700 employees were female. So, what do you want them to do? Do you want the Acolyte to send out press gangs into the British streets? Just kind of knock people out and force them to work on the Acolyte? It's like, we don't care about these people. We don't care whether they're competent or experienced. We just want holes. We won't be satisfied until we're literally crowbarring them into the building as they're screaming for help, getting kidnapped, desperately praying that one day they'll get back to their children. And did you know
that across the entire workforce, their average hourly pay was 19.4% lower than the blokes?
And you're like, hang on. If it turns out that they don't often enter the workforce, it does mean that you'll have more blokes in the top positions, which will always skew the wages. Because men are more variable than women, and women tend to group around the average, you will always end up with more men in the top positions, because you want the best people in those positions. But if you don't do that, and you try and crowbar more people into those top positions who don't deserve to be there, you end up with the Acolyte.
I'll tell you what you get. Call the police. Get what you deserve.
But all of this requires you to not just be able to read figures and understand them, but also abstract the data to a higher level. So rather than just looking at number, you look at and understand the holistic picture above the numbers. Why the numbers are that way. We don't get that here. I don't know what the IQ of this post is, but I'm not particularly impressed. It'll definitely group around the average.
You can't say that without proof.
Okay, maybe this paragraph will convince you. Rey became a pin-up for female audiences. You what? Have they been so busy pinning up their Rey posters that they just haven't had time to get around to watching any of the Star Wars content since? There's just a whole host of them waiting to one day get around to it, but wouldn't you know, a woman's work is never done. Once they get through the ironing though, they'll be right there. And in 2016, Disney made Rogue One a spin-off with another female lead played by a British actress. The Acolyte steps this strategy up a gear with a diverse cast designed to appeal to an even wider demographic. It's worked to treat that as, hasn't it, really? Massively wide appeal to where the 13% of the wider audience thinks it's just a bit better than average. I mean, some may take this to mean that crowbarring people into positions that they haven't earned and don't deserve may have been a mistake. But hey, I mean, that, I don't think I can call it music, but that video, that really proved them wrong, didn't it? This part of the strategy isn't just smart, it's also absolutely admirable. Why? You'll notice how they say this stuff, but they'll never say why because they don't actually have an argument for it. No, it's just a definitive moral good. Yeah, but why? I mean, I can explain to you in detail about why it's evil, because you're actively discriminating against people to put people that you prefer, due to the way they look in their categories, into positions which they're not good enough for.
What are they for? I mean, look at the chubby little bastards just sitting around everywhere.
This is why you have to actively discriminate against people to put them there in the first place. If they deserved the position, they'd get there naturally, and you wouldn't need to get that crowbar and start hammering them into the cafeteria room. You wouldn't need press gangs on the street to get people into those positions. You wouldn't need to give advice or code words or speak around the subject, as we've just found out in the Disney leaks.
Acceptable code words and buzzwords that are used. We're not looking at like the usual suspects for this job.
As an intention, I wanted to put people in the room who I felt like hadn't been there before. But I can't go into more detail on that because that would be illegal. No, you'd just give people the job that they earned, that they deserve. You'd be able to treat everybody fairly, but you don't like that because you might find out your maths equations don't naturally show what you want. And what would that say about you? The problem is, the strategy doesn't stop there. No, the problem is that they're just trying to wring as much money out of Star Wars as possible. This is the Star Wars fatigue defense. Our system would work. We're admirable. We're good people. I'm so moral that I have to make up other excuses about why my ideology doesn't work. Because you could follow my advice and be profitable, or you could follow hers and go bankrupt. Really is that simple. No, don't you understand? They've released 6 streaming series in 5 years. Oh, the horror. You've released 8 episodes a year for the last 5 years? How on earth will people have the time to watch that? Nobody's got the time. You expect me to free up 6 hours of my time every year? Are you insane? This is why a lot of the time I don't even believe they believe it, because it's so obviously BS that you really come down to the question, are you stupid or evil? Pick one.
At the end of the day, this is a story of representation, and it matters.
No, Star Wars was only good when fans had to wait years for the next installment of the saga, and this built up hype. This is now evaporated as the next fix comes a few days after the previous. I'm sorry, a few days. You literally said 8 episodes come out once a year. There's hardly a few days, is it? A year. Every 10 months you get another series? No wonder there isn't enough room for hype. These people must have really short memories, because I remember when we used to get 22 episodes a series every year. These series would be running nigh on half the year, and then there was a 6-month break, and they came back and did it again, and people loved it. Now, 6 hours, that's too much. Gotta need at least a 3-year break for you to build up the hype for the next one. Maybe you wouldn't if it wasn't ass. Maybe if it was good, you wouldn't rely on a big massive time gap in the middle for them to forget just how bad the last one was, and why it might have been bad in the first place, for the male audience. And so, her plan is, well, we just need a complete pause on it, to build up hype for the future installment. She thinks that's gonna fix everything. Just take a pause. Don't think about why it failed. No, it was the timing that failed. This is literally running rearguard for an ideology that does nothing but burn. Or just have a gap. Make it go away for a bit. See if they'll forget about it. Obviously, keep doing everything which makes you appeal to a wider demographic, because that's just smart, and that's absolutely admirable. But hide it away until they're willing to swallow it again, eh?
I cannot even believe those words just came out of your face towards my face.
And of course, we have to talk out of both sides of our mouths that simultaneously Star Wars is failing and we need to hide it away. But also, despite the dire reviews, it got 4.8 million, and that makes it the biggest series of 2024. So I guess that means it's a success. Otherwise, what's the point of giving it that title? Unless you're trying to make out it's successful. Which if it was, why does it need to go on a break? There are times where I wish the people that had counter arguments, they were just smarter, to be honest. At least if you're going to try and make an argument, don't contradict yourself in your own article. That's not much to ask, because basically they're relying on, oh, this has gone off subscribers, so we'll never know whether it's successful, because the views are awful, and the reviews are awful, but we can't know if it's a success. Do you think they've made a profit on $180 million? Because Willow was cheaper, and they wiped that off the platform.
Avagadoo.
And don't you know that all the people that have worked on this series, even though it's crap, and we tried to crowbar as many women into it as possible, we're definitely not going to say they have any responsibility for the outcome of the show, despite the male-dominated audience. But didn't you know they got paid less? If you take the middle numbers of hours worked from highest to lowest, and I'm like, so? I understand you're a journalist, so you probably never had a proper job. But if you did, you'd know that in any big business, there are an entire range of people that work there. And some people do less paid jobs, higher paid jobs. So taking an hourly wage is entirely and utterly pointless and tells you nothing. Why are you making a list that compares like executive producers and janitors? Of course one gets paid less than the others. Do you think you're making a point here? Do you want the janitors to just be put into executive level positions, despite the fact they're not qualified for it? Because that's the only way you're going to balance your hourly equations, you delusional bin. But then, understanding this would require a level of abstraction that I don't think she's capable of doing. She just looks at figures and go, oh, they're not equal, must be bigots. This is the depth of intellectual thought that we have been reduced to nowadays.
This number isn't this number, must be bigotry.
Oh, this is why I hate this level of argument. It's so thick, it's offensive. It's naturally repulsive to the human brain. Also, even though men outnumber women in the bottom, can we just let that sentence sit there for a second? 53% of the employees in the highest hourly pay band were also... Oh no. I'm sorry. Did you think you were making a point here? Did you know that although more men are getting paid poorly than women, men are also getting paid more? If they're at both ends of the scale, maybe people are just doing jobs they're qualified for. Oh no. Like I say, the variability of men will end up with more men at the bottom and more men at the top. This is how it works. This is like a cave woman discovering a lighter in a forest and going, oh, fire from my fingers. Thinks she's made the discovery of the century, and everyone else is like, yeah, love, we know. What's your point? Inequality has been a hot topic recently for Lucasfilm president Kathleen Kennedy. Very masculine name there, obviously. Completely destroys her own argument herself. Not that I think it even needs to be disproved. Her IQ does that for her. But not this kind. Oh, everything must be equal. Everything. Despite the fact that people aren't equal, some people are naturally better than others. This is common sense. I am absolutely terrible at the 100-meter sprint. Other people, really good at it. Leslie Headland, absolutely terrible at being a showrunner. Other people, great at it. I hope I pointed to the right picture there, because I'm not sure which one's which. Oh my, she's even included the quote herself, because the fan base is male-dominated. Even if all your maths equations had actually had a point in the rest of the article, that sentence right there would have made it redundant. Because yes, in a male-dominated fan base, of course the blokes deserve to be in higher positions. Obviously. Blokes should be making content for blokes. This isn't even complicated to understand why. Obviously, their morality and their values has to be represented by people like them. Because someone like Leslie Headland couldn't possibly comprehend what their values values are. And yet, bemoaning the lack of women in the Star Wars fan base, perhaps she should have ensured the ones who are working behind the scenes are getting paid they are. Do you know how I know they are? Because it would be illegal not to.
There's no way we're hiring a white helmets. At some point, there's going to be a lawsuit. That's kind of how it feels.
You're not comparing the same job to the same job.
Oh, what happens if we take the tea lady
And compare it to the executive producer? And it takes a really demented individual to not understand why that's a problem. Such a demented one that I just think you're being disingenuous. But I am willing to be convinced that you are genuinely that stupid. I like to keep an open mind until that happens. All they can do is continue to hold out for a new hope. And after reading an article like that, you do have to be reminded of what Amandla said.
Journalism looking at you. Did you forget it's your job to provide the truth?
Basically witnessed a journalist prostrating themselves in front of you, going,
I think you deserve more money for absolutely no reason.
please, can't we lift even more people into positions they haven't earned, don't deserve, and are incapable of doing? If only we could do that, we could make the numbers match up. And the numbers, Mason, they matter. And after all that, Amandla thinks they're not on her side.
Seem you gave up all your life, that's your money and views.
Amandla thinks she's the persecuted one by the journalists.
The desperation of oppressors is rising, and now they holding on to any old thing they can use.
When the journalists are coming out and attacking the audience? No, they need to be on your side even harder. There have been very few people like Eric Kane. The Acolyte Rotten Tomatoes score keeps falling, and maybe it should if we ever hope to find balance in the Force. Because I'll say one thing about Eric Kane, I disagree with him about a lot of his articles, but at least I think he's honest, rather than the rest of them that really just seem to be spinning a narrative, no matter how insane it makes them look, or how wildly they have to interpret such basic thing as figures, to the point where they're so obviously incorrect and misleading, all to try and stay in Hollywood's good graces. Because really, when I think of the reputation of Hollywood, I have to ask, is it really worth it? Is it really worth selling your credibility so cheaply? But those are just my thoughts. What are yours? Let me know down in the comments below. Like the video if you liked the video, subscribe, more videos in the future, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.